So last week we took a look at Crash Bandicoot for the PlayStation, an all-around classic in the PlayStation's library of games. For a first attempt at making a game in a genre that had, well, very limited entries at the time, I think it's fair to say that NaughtyDog did a really good job of it. But when all the hype for the game had eventually faded, it was time to release a sequel. Today, we're going to be taking a look at that sequel, Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back. Without any further ado, let's start this shit. Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back was released only a short year after the release of the original game. Although the original game sold very well, as we took a look at in the first video, there are features of the game that made it age relatively poorly, like the save system, clunky platforming, and even the bosses. Crash 2 basically took everything wrong with Crash 1 and fixed it, and took everything that it did right and spammed the shit out of it. We can basically start anywhere here in this video, because as far as I'm concerned, there's not a lot of things wrong with this game. There are so many things that I can praise Crash 2 for, the list goes on and on. I don't think it's worth going into detail with the story too much, but basically, Cortex is trying to deceive Crash. This guy from Crash 1 is trying to help Crash to stop Cortex, and this guy's Cortex's new assistant that is helping him scheme to destroy the world. Enough with the story though, let's talk about the real deal, crap platforming. Crash in this game controls a lot more appropriately for a linear 3D platformer, and even has some small adjustments made to movement. Crash can now move with an analog input, meaning that there's an infinite range of movement for Crash to go, compared to Crash 1 where you could only move in 8 directions. This is a change that makes Crash 2 age much better, and makes it much easier to pick up and play nowadays, although people have criticised it, saying that the platforming in the first game was made with digital input in mind, so the jumps were more precise and harder to fail. And to that I say, Crash 2 can be just as precise. The Crash in the first game was kinda clunky, hard to turn, and often floaty. Generally uncomfortable to control unless you're used to driving a tank on a daily basis. The Crash in Crash 2 feels super tight to control and makes platforming feel rewarding. In addition to this, Crash also has the ability to slide, crawl and belly flop now. These all hold their own uses and would later go on to establish themselves in Crash's regular roster of movement. Now, you'd imagine that these new options for movement would feel forced, and it would kinda be obvious when the game would want you to use one over the other. Well, that's not the case. Sure, if you want to get everything in Crash 2, you're going to have to learn the most efficient uses for these abilities in order to get to specific spots or break certain boxes. But in standard platforming, it isn't really forced upon you. The environment still retains an area for control that isn't completely demanding of Crash's abilities. It's still similar platforming to the first game at its core, which is a good thing because of how well it was done. There's also a new collectible found in every level. Crystals make their appearance in Crash 2 and are placed in pretty obvious spots at the end of every main level. After you collect 5 crystals, you fight a boss to progress to the next 5 levels in the warp room, and there's 25 crystals in total. It's reasonable for crystals to be added so you can see your crystal count at all times, and effectively keep track of your progress throughout the game. And while I do love the idea of crystals, I don't think they fit quite into Crash 2 as well as they do in Crash 3. I feel like they were much better utilised in Crash 3, because you don't feel like you're going to the place to retrieve something in Crash 2. But it's okay, they were implemented properly and established formula correctly. Speaking of which, the places we see in Crash 2 I feel are much more developed compared to the levels we visited in Crash 1. The colour issue I mentioned before is no longer a problem at all, with stages like Snowbiz and Sooner or Later taking otherwise mundane environments but making them really pop. This extends to the enemies too, these small hedgehogs in the snow and, well, Henry the Hoover in the sewers. The enemies in Crash 2 do not disappoint. Where the levels steered in any direction in Crash 2 though, is made apparent with the new types of gameplay. Crash 2 has elaborated on 2 of the game styles found in Crash 1. Being the hog stages and the boulder stages. Sure, they brought it back in the forms of polar bear levels, and well, reimagined the boulder levels with a giant pissed off polar bear, but I'm referring to the jetboard sections on the river or the anti-gravity jetpack areas in the space levels. And by the way, it's so cool to see these floating boxes here at the start. This is attention to detail, ladies and gentlemen. Attention to detail done right. Look at the giant log traps in the snow levels. They turn into giant pistons by the time you reach the 5th warp room. The level designs seen all throughout Crash 2 are honestly perfect. The only levels I really feel like, oh man, I have to play this level on a playthrough, are levels like Ruination. But that's only because 1, I suck at the jumps, and 2, I'm not a fan of dark environments and I feel it's kind of unsatisfying. Dark environments in the warp room though actually enhance the experience in the cutscenes for the player. Like, look at Cortex here with the lens flare and scan lines from the hologram. This looks really nice, and somewhat intimidating dare I say at the time. It's a shame that the Insane Trilogy took away from this by making the whole warp room brighter and less sharp. The voice of Cortex complements the whole scenario well here, sounding dark and sinister with that hint of evil.
Crash, my boy, you are more than halfway there. But I'm sure you've noticed that things are getting harder. The last 10 crystals will be the hardest to gather, and our enemies will be sending their strongest forces to thwart you.
Oh, also Clancy Brown does the voice of Mr. Krabs from SpongeBob. Also, ice physics. I feel like they get slept on in Crash 2 because they're not all that apparent, only being used in a small number of stages. But when they do decide to make an appearance, I don't feel that sudden shudder that I normally feel with ice physics in other platforming games. Much like Crash in this game, the ice physics feel responsive, and your control can be adjusted with little effort, to be honest. I mean, ice levels are still ice levels, platforming with slippy, impaired movement is never fun. And especially when there's loads of these green things about. New box added in Crash 2, by the way. This green nightmare of a time is called a nitro box. It's a box that will instantly explode if you dare as much as touch it. Forget jumping on it or spinning it. This box will hate you just as much as you hate it. The reinforced crate was added in Crash 2 as well, but you just need to belly flop to break it. Both new box types contribute to the box count needed for gems, which you can obtain in more than one life now, by the way, and the box count saves at each checkpoint. For nitro boxes though, you'll need to find a nitro detonator box hidden at some point in a level, which can be an absolute nightmare to find at times. Like, the one in this level makes me physically ache wondering how someone is meant to find this. Regardless though, it makes the effort all that much more rewarding when you eventually claim that gem, but it makes it that much more frustrating when you finish the level with only a handful of boxes left unbroken. Some levels also have secret one-way paths that you can only access if you enter the level from a different level. Yes, some levels will have a secret exit that will take you to a secret hidden chamber in the warp room, where you are presented with hidden entrances to levels that you've already beaten. These normally have some difficult platforming and typical spiteful parts to get under your nails, but then they either give you the boxes you need to get the box gem, or they give you a coloured gem needed to get other gems in other levels. It's things like this that make the whole game feel more interconnected through exterior level design, and it makes you feel more accomplished when you've not only beaten the game to its fullest extent, but you're also knowledgeable about how to go about it again. Also, the music in this game. Crash 1 did a great job at making itself sound distinct, and almost every song featured in the game helped to improve the atmosphere that the art direction and stage itself were setting. Crash 2's music not only sounds distinct, but I think it's generally much nicer sounding compared to Crash 1's, and it still promotes level atmosphere in stages. The new types of levels really give it the chance to demonstrate a range of music, but even when we look at the main themes and popular tracks, I personally prefer Crash 2's music a lot more. While Crash 1's main theme may be in the public eye, or ear in this case, for as long as the Crash series is relevant, I think all the music in Crash 2, from the title theme to the snow theme to the jungle theme, all stand much taller, and do indeed exist as much more impressive pieces of music. Crash 2 definitely has the best music in the game out of the original trilogy, and that is simply a statement I'll take to the grave. Another addition into the standard Crash formula that Crash 2 pioneered was the death route. If you get to a point in a given level without dying up to that point, you can enter the death route. There are 6 death routes in total in Crash 2, with each one having a clear gem at the end of it. Additionally, some death routes may even contain boxes needed for the box gem in that level, which can make that level infinitely harder to 100% complete. I'm looking at you pisting it away. Honestly though, death routes are a good addition into the series, and I think they're perfectly fine here in Crash 2. They offer an exceptional challenge for players that put the effort in to go the extra mile. They offer unique music that makes everything feel like it's running at 10 times speed, and can add replayability to some levels if you're that kind of person that appreciates backtracking, although you can't get the box gem and the death route gem in the same run. At least, they didn't want you to. So you have to traverse the death route, collect the gem at the end of it, then die on purpose to go back to the main level, because otherwise you'd proceed through an exit back to the warp room, and then finish the level as normal. This should have been a properly implemented feature, and it kinda makes the death routes feel like they're a tiny bit of a last minute inclusion. But I can forgive it, because it's not really a major fault. I'd still rather them be in the game. Now, what about the bosses in Crash 2? Crash 1 had bosses that were okay at best. They weren't too advanced and appeared to show up without any rhyme or reason. Bosses in Crash 2 are related to the warp room. I can consciously link Tiny Tiger to the third room, or Ripperoo to the first, who, can I say, has a much needed improvement in this game. Much more relevant as a first boss compared to this guy in the first game. Oh, and the other 3 bosses are Komodo Bros, Engine, and Cortex. And can I take this time to express how poor of a final boss this is? I mean, all you need to do is fly with the jetpack forward and spin the bastard a few times and yeah, he's done. I mean, kind of embarrassing when the Doctor's assistant is more impressive than the Doctor himself, and that's a position I'd never like to find myself in, by the way. So yeah, to sum up, Crash 2 had better bosses, but the final boss is probably the worst out of any Crash game. I'd honestly rather play this as a final boss. In general, I feel like Crash 2 is a much stronger entry into the series when compared to Crash 1. It definitely holds up better today, and I have a much easier time telling people to go and play Crash 2, compared to when I try and tell them to go play Crash 1. It's not like you have a story to catch up on, I mean it's Crash fucking Bandicoot for fuck's sake. Anyway, I digress. This has been really fun taking a look at one of the games I love the most. And just like I mentioned in my first video, it's not like I'm hard biased by any nostalgia of anything. I do genuinely just believe that this is a great Crash game, and a brilliant platformer whether you like Crash or not. If you disagree, that's completely fine. I'm not here to tell you what your favourite out of the original trilogy is, but this is my favourite. And, well, if you don't like Crash but decide to play this game, you'll change your opinion very fast. Thank you for watching my review on Crash 2. If you liked the video, then be sure to express it with a like, and remember to subscribe if you want to support the channel. It's absolutely free and costs you nothing but a little thought. Social media links will be down there as always. My name is Flynny, and this has been a review of Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back. Thank you for watching and take care.